Now, Katty K, there's one part of the trial yesterday that was just absolutely fascinating, where Donald Trump went on this bizarre rant, and he just continued ranting. It's unfair, it's rigged, it's this, it's that. And the prosecutor just kept listening and kept listening. And finally, he looks at him like he's a 5-year-old toddler, and he goes, "Are you done?" And Donald Trump, like a 5-year-old toddler, says, "Done."
Yeah. How many times have you got into a long rant with your children and realized that actually it was no point because you were never going to win and they were never going to win either, but you just had to kind of let them vent for a little bit of time? And it did feel like that yesterday, except that then they had that break and they came back and it seemed that the prosecutor had a kind of change of tactic and the judge had a change of tactic and they were going to let Donald Trump speak. I don't know that there's a way that you put Donald Trump on any witness stand and expect whatever oath he has taken to tell the truth for him to do that, because even during the course of his testimony yesterday, there were things that he said that facts didn't add up to. We know that. I mean, every fact checker can say that. And he doesn't treat a court of law any different than he treats a television interview, honestly, or a campaign rally. It was the same language and the same tone and the same grievances. And his campaign and his supporters will say that they love him all the more for it. And that the performance that they saw yesterday, whatever Chuck Rosenberg was saying us in the last hour, how bad it was for him legally, there's no indication that it's bad for him politically. And for him, it's all the same venue.
Let's bring into the conversation former U.S. Attorney, MSNBC legal analyst Joyce Vance, senior legal correspondent at The Messenger, Adam Klasfeld. He's been covering the trial live from the courtroom. Good morning to you both. Adam, I'll start with you. You were there in the room. It's interesting to hear at the end of the day, Attorney General Tish James saying he can rant and rave and call it a witch hunt and a disgrace. We're just going to keep producing documentary evidence of fraud because that's what this is about. So what was it like in the room, and what do you think Donald Trump's goal is here? Because it doesn't sound like much of a legal defense, more of a political one.
Absolutely. And it's like what your last guest just said. It was very similar to a political rally. And as a matter of fact, the judge had to remind Trump at one point, this is not a political rally. A couple of times he had threatened to essentially cut Trump's testimony short and did not follow through on that threat. And that is an interesting thing. What happened? And one of the things that did happen is the state's counsel did not object. And we can see as the dust settles why. After the counsel let Trump talk, let Trump make certain admissions, including the admissions about the financial statements. You have to remember, his sons both played down any affiliation with those statements because they are at the heart of this case. Don Jr. said that was the accountants, those were the lawyers. Eric Trump said that he didn't have anything to do with it. Trump conceded it because the state let him talk.
Yeah, he said there was some blaming of the accountants, but he did say, yes, I did see some of those statements, and I look at some, I look at others. It was kind of mealy-mouthed in that way. Right. What is your sense of how the judge is watching and listening and processing this? Is because he is, in effect, the jury here, as we look at this at a bench trial. What is his sort of reaction to everything that's going on in front of him, Ben?
Well, that was a really interesting moment when the judge, again, threatened to cut off the testimony and didn't. And it kind of showed there at one moment the judge said, "You could attack me," which is a remarkable statement for a judge to say to a witness and a defendant in any trial. And I think that he realizes, and there was some reporting on this in Rolling Stone, that the defense may be trying to bait him into a maneuver, into some sort of overreaction that would compromise this verdict on appeal. And the judge didn't take the bait.
So, Joyce, I wanted to bring you in on that exact point, because that sure seems like what the Trump team is trying to do, is try to provoke the judge to say something that they can try to use in an appeal or take out of context. In fact, we saw one of Trump's lawyers try to do exactly that afterwards, sort of quoting what was a fairly heated back and forth between Trump and the judge and suggesting that Trump wasn't getting a fair hearing here. What's your take on that strategy, and do you think it can be effective for the former president?
Well, if that was the strategy, Jonathan, it was an utter failure. And here's why. As y'all have been discussing, this is a bench trial where the judge sits in for the jury. If there was a jury in the box, the judge would have been forced to restrict Trump's answers. He would have directed Trump as a witness to answer the question. He would have been moving to strike any of these extraneous comments Trump continued to make, which weren't admissible and which were prejudicial. But because the judge is hearing the evidence, the law assumes that the judge can set aside anything that's irrelevant. And this was what the judge ended up doing. He just let Trump go. I think that was a deliberate decision that the judge made. And ultimately, if you're Trump's lawyers sitting at counsel table, you are watching your only hope of surviving this case, which is the appeal. You're watching it fade away. Because in advance of trial, the judge made, as Joe mentioned, the findings about fraud, that the Trump Organization is liable, that in essence, the Trump Organization as a business will be shuttered, that they will remove its certificates to operate. On appeal, they would have argued, Trump's lawyers, that that decision by the judge was misplaced and that he shouldn't have found fraud as a matter of law. Yesterday, because the judge let Donald Trump ramble, Donald Trump conceded that point, and that means that this decision should survive appeal, and Trump Organization, as Trump has operated it for all these years, is at an end.